The University of Iowa is located on the homelands
of the Ojibwe and Anishinaabe, Bahoji,
Iowa,
Kickapoo, Omatmanewak,
Menominee,
Miamika,
Miami,
Natuchi,
Missouri,
Omaha, Wazaji,
Osage,
Jaware,
Oto,
Odawa,
Ottawa,
Ponca, Potawatomi, Nishnawbe,
Potawatomi,
Meskwaki, Nemahaki, Sakawaki, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, Sanish, Nubaga, Nuweta.
and the Ho-Chunk Nations.
The following tribal nations: the Omaha Tribe of Nebraska and Iowa, Ponca Tribe of Nebraska, Sac and Fox Nation of the Mississippi and Iowa, and Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska continue to thrive in the state of Iowa, and we continue to acknowledge.
As an academic institution, it is our responsibility to acknowledge the sovereignty and the traditional territories of these tribal nations, and the treaties that were used to remove these tribal nations, and the histories of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution since 1847. Consistent with the university's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, understanding the historical and current experiences of Native peoples will help inform the work we do. Collectively, as a university, to engage in building relationships through academic scholarship, collaborative partnerships, community service, enrollment and retention efforts, acknowledging our past, our present, and future Native nations. Welcome to our program tonight, featuring Diana Tuite. Diana is an art historian and independent curator, currently serving as visiting senior curator of modern and contemporary art. In her previous position at the Colby College Museum of Art, she organized the nationally touring exhibition Bob Thompson, This House Is Mine, currently on view at the Hammer Museum. It was just named a must-see exhibition in the Los Angeles Times. Diana edited the accompanying volume published by Yale University Press. Other recent projects include Jacob Lawrence, The Life of Toussaint Louverture, Turquoise Dyson, Nautical Dusk, and Hugh Locke, Here's the Thing. In her curatorial practice, Diana is committed to bringing visibility to under-examined histories and creating spaces for interdisciplinary knowledge to contribute to social justice-informed research and interpretation. At the Colby Museum, she chaired a committee dedicated to diversity, inclusion, equity, and access, and was instrumental in building an expansive collection and developing new strategies for interpretation and engagement. She belongs to the advisory circle for Indigo Arts Alliance, a Maine-based organization committed to cultivating the artistic development of people of African descent. Please help me welcome Diana.
Okay, we have double mics, so let me know if at any point you can't hear me, but thank you so much for the introduction, Kim, and for orchestrating this event. And I also want to thank Lauren Lessing, the director here, for bringing me into this project. The team here at the Stanley really moves mountains just about every day, and they do it with grace and good humor. And everything the museum puts forth represents a collective effort. So I just want to acknowledge those who have preceded us, the former employees, the donors, docents, faculty, and students, and everyone who's given generously over the years to the museum and the university. So thank you for all you do. I also want to acknowledge fellow curator Corey Gunlock. I only joined the planning for homecoming in October, but Corey had several years to devote to his vision for the arts of Africa and the African diaspora, and I'm grateful that I could follow his ambitious lead. I'm not able to advance, it seems like. Sorry. I need to. Thank you. So I had never been to Iowa before this year, nor had I ever curated a museum I hadn't seen, or installed artwork that was packed and in storage virtually. But this wasn't the first time that I've surmounted curatorial hurdles. So just a drive-by to give you a sense of how unreasonable the projects that I take on can be. You see a few slides from previous exhibitions. The first was Brazilian artist Ravani Neuenschwander, Mexican artist Teresa Margolles, British artist Hugh Locke. Just last week, the New York Historical Society convened a panel discussion as part of the Henry Luce Conversations on American Art and Museums. It was moderated by the incoming director of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, Christopher Bedford, and the event featured curators, scholars, and artists. Coming from the Baltimore Museum of Art, Bedford explained one of the ways he has framed his outlook for San Francisco. Quote, museums have been in their first chapter for hundreds of years. It's probably time to begin chapter 2. When asked what more should be happening in the field, a fellow discussant echoed this sense of resistance to page turning. Quote, the canon is being corrected, but it's not being contested, she noted. And that's an issue. In literature and music, those conversations are happening. Indeed, why invest our energy in canon expansion when we could dispense with this outmoded, inherently problematic concept altogether? So tonight, I just want to share an overview of some of the scaffolding behind the Generations exhibition. It's one component of the 3-year inaugural. In doing so, I'll highlight a few moments, so you'll indulge me in letting me talk about some of my favorite things. And I'll look at the ways they contribute to dialogues within the museum field. At that same event, when one of the curators was asked what we must do better, she said that curators must be attentive to the local and the global in ways that people in the United States are not always sensitive to. I agree, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about the Homecoming exhibition. The global condition, she added, must be one of the central threads in our work and not just an acquisition strategy. So this mandate, this sense of what we must do, really reminded me of something I encountered in the course of my research into this painting, which you may know, a 1939 painting by the Catalan artist Joan Miró. And the Catalan people are an ethnic group in Spain. The painting, entitled "A Dewdrop Falling from a Bird's Wing, Wakes Rosalie, who has been asleep in the shadow of a spider's web." In translation, of course. It's a painting on burlap, a fabulous composition populated by wings, webs, and watchful eyes moving in many directions. Years later, Miró described how the trauma of these years, the 30s, drove him to escapism. And he said, "I closed myself within myself purposely. The night, music, and the stars began to play a major role in suggesting my paintings." At the same time that the painting casts its lyrical spell, I cannot help but hear in its poetic title an explicit echo of the Enlightenment Spanish artist Francisco de Goya. And you see on the right, the sleep of reason produces monsters. Goya's extraordinary self-portrait, it was intended as the frontispiece for the 1799 edition of satirical prints called Los Caprichos. Here the artist is doubled over, closed within himself, like Miro. When we abandon reason, Goya cautions, nocturnal creatures like the lynx and the owl, harbingers of irrationality, descend. So just what does it mean to awaken in the shadow of a spider's web in 1939? And I won't digress much more on the Miro, but actually, let me stay on it. I consulted a catalog from the Museum of Modern Art's 1941 exhibition of the artist's work. Our painting was not in it. The show ran from November 11th, 1941 to January 11th, 1942, which means that it encompassed the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor and the US entry into World War II. It's an exhibition that is governed by the artist's absence. Miro, who first traveled to France in 1920, settled there when the Spanish Civil War broke out in 1936. In 1939, he moved his family from Paris to Normandy. And the following year, the year after our painting, with France and Germany at war, he had little choice but to return to Spain, now under the rule of dictator Francisco Franco, who brutally suppressed the Catalan and Basque populations, nullifying their autonomy charters and banning their languages. And my final note, in the MoMA catalog, the curator skates over the geopolitical events of the 1930s and 1940s in Europe, summarizing the life-threatening conditions faced by Miro and so many refugees as follows. The fall of France swept Miro from Varengeville-sur-Mer, where he had lived in relative seclusion, across the border of Spain to Majorca. Since then, only fragmentary news of his work has crossed the Atlantic. I will admit to enjoying any opportunity to pick on MoMA. And as an art historian, as a human, I'm shocked by the casual treatment of this artist's safety and civil rights. The rise of fascism is treated as incidental to the artist's work and utterly detached from business as usual in the United States. When asked in the 1970s how he had shown his opposition to Franco's regime, Miro responded, "Free and violent things." Now for the show. Generations constitutes one half of the installation. It's an evolving exhibition that counters the museum's foundational logic, which made claims for and with 20th century US American and European art. And it does so through radial inquiries, webs, perhaps. It stresses interconnectivity, the pedagogical, the material, formal, thematic, relationships between teachers and students, formal and informal, peers and friends, even family members. Spatially and symbolically, it's really bookended from one end of the building to the other, with Sam Gilliam's Red April and Lorraine O'Grady's Mademoiselle Bourgeoise Noire. Acquired just 2 years after the opening of the original museum building, Red April underscores the prescience and risk-taking that characterized the collection's formation. And the O'Grady represents a recent acquisition by a university alumna, herself quite a risk taker. Miriam Shapiro, who you see here. Her work is installed in the same gallery as some of her teachers at the University of Iowa, Mauricio Lazansky and Philip Guston. Guston was also a neighbor once she moved to New York in 1951. Shapiro and her husband were among Joan Mitchell's closest friends. They rented a house together on Long Island in 1953, when Mitchell really dove into the body of work to which our painting from 1955 or thereabouts belongs. You see this early Guston in the middle. It really establishes, I think, the classicism of his work as he swiveled between figuration and abstraction over the course of his career. The exhibition combines recent acquisitions with works on loan, works that were not often on view in the past, and some that may never have been. And what we're looking for, I think, at this museum, at college museums, at civic museums, what we're trying to achieve, where we are opening up ourselves to learn, who we are hoping to reach, these things change. In the words of Joan Mitchell, the past becomes more meaningful because of our tastes today. This installation borrows its title from a quotation by the writer Toni Morrison. Each generation has a kind of love. Conceptually, it also draws upon ideas of continuity and accountability that are embodied in what's referred to as the seventh generation principle, based on Native North American beliefs that the decisions we make today should steward the world generations into the future. The installation leans on historical specificity at the same time that it resists the tendency to employ linear or teleological narratives. As fellow curator Teresa Papanikolas, who's a curator of American art at the Seattle Art Museum, has noted, chronology is something that is imposed onto history. It gets to be deterministic. The installation is organized thematically, with galleries conceived around certain topics and lines of inquiry, but many of these are really applicable across the collection. And my hope was that the themes would speak to the museum's values. With Miro and other works in mind, I determined that one of the themes, the one you enter into, would be points of departure. And you see on the short wall, work by the Palestinian artist Samia Halabi, whose prints will rotate. She was born in Jerusalem in 1936 and has lived in the United States, and describes herself as a culturally relocated person, a phrase that preserves the sanctity of one's cultural identity, even in diaspora. This theme, points of departure, offers a way of prying open questions about the urgent circumstances endured by individuals who have immigrated, been displaced or dispossessed, or perhaps entered into self-imposed exile. More generally, I think it emphasizes intersectionality and the ways that we benefit from exchanging ideas across our unique subject positions. Another theme, human nature, encourages us to apply more of an ecological lens to the collection. The objects on view here pose questions about cultural values, community making, who is granted access to nature, how is nature used symbolically, what ideologies does it serve, what stories, I mean, simply put, I think what stories can cotton, canvas, clay, and wood tell? And here you see, with its winged symmetries, Nancy Petway's brick layer quilt fluttering alongside Henri Matisse's study of domestic repose. You also see Faith Ringgold's Tar Beach 2, a screen print after one of her many story quilts. Very bright, in this case, Alma Woodsy Thomas painting her yellow spring flares in proximity to Edvard Munch's cornfield, and not on the slide, Danny Lyon's photograph of stooped cotton pickers. Going back here, you have Charles Ray's brick obelisk rising from a sawhorse, and on the wall at left, Lillian Pitt's stoneware mask looking on. At the outset, I knew that the anchors in this gallery would be the Gee's Bend quilts from a former plantation community on the Alabama River. They established continuity with textiles on the other side of the museum. They're objects of use that represent intergenerational artistry of women. And they symbolize art's potential as a tool for cultural survival and liberation. They illuminate historical biases against craft in arts institutions. While these may not be the most historically significant pieces from Gee's Bend, they attest to the vitality of this tradition. And at right and left, flanked by works by Helen Frankenthaler and Judy Chicago. At right, Henri Matisse and Carrie James Marshall. At left, they illuminate the gendered history of the decorative and how this category has been used to diminish and how it has been used, embraced in a gesture of empowerment. Just skip back. So our Matisse on the left with several other versions of the same composition from that year. Matisse, for those who don't know, was born into a family of weavers in a town in northern France that was renowned for its handloom weaving. He began to collect textiles from around the world when he was only a student. Eventually, he amassed a really unwieldy collection of rugs, blankets, African Kuba cloths, wall hangings, and fabric remnants. And there is a wonderful book and an exhibition of about 15 years ago devoted to Matisse called The Fabric of Dreams. Here you see him with an Egyptian curtain. Returning to the theme of this gallery, a question emerged from me. How might the aesthetics of Gee's Bend artists and Matisse cast light on one another, and in so doing, surface entangled histories of colonialism, resource extraction, and collecting? Homecoming also makes strides towards what multilingualism can look like at our public institutions, as you've noticed. The didactics appear in Spanish and English, a reflection of the fact that 18% of Iowa residents speak Spanish. What was striking to me is how much this percentage exceeds the narrowness of the collection's work by Spanish-speaking artists. And of course, demographic imbalances are pervasive. At a recent conference, a curator from the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis presented on their collection when they crunched the numbers. He and his colleagues determined that 50 artists represent 50% of the work in their collection. Of these, only 2 are individuals of color and 8 are women. So while we focus on rectifying inequity in collections, how can we commit other resources to representation? And one way that museums are doing this is through language. In 2019, this is not here, this is Colby College. In 2019, I invited a coalition of Wabanaki curators to organize an exhibition of contemporary art by Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, and Abenaki artists, collectively known as the Wabanaki. As many participating artists said, this was the first show to put their cultural belongings in a fine art rather than an anthropological setting, and it was the first time they saw their language on the walls of an art museum. I'm showing you here a label from the exhibition Hearts of Our People, Native Women Artists. It's a show with over 100 artists that was organized by the Minneapolis Institute of Art in 2019. It was curated by a team of curators in concert with an advisory board. The original idea was to translate everything into one other native language. Instead, curators decided to translate each label into the language spoken by the artist. This meant contending with over 30 languages, some of them no longer spoken. It was an incredible undertaking, just technologically, in terms of what the orthography does to your computer. And you see here a label translated into Cherokee. The Cherokee were the first Indigenous people to publish a newspaper in what is now the United States. Their language is severely endangered, and the exhibition contributed in a way to its preservation. So at the Stanley, one goal was to bring out as many Pueblo ceramics as possible, uniting objects that entered the collection decades ago, with some acquired as part of the education collection. And this really represents a beginning, an initial effort at getting these items out on view so that we can confirm and deepen our research on them. And we can do so with the help of external scholars and potters. Franklin Peters, a member of the Acoma Pueblo, whose work is included here, will hopefully be coming to campus in the spring to give a demonstration. Following the lead of other museums in the field, we've begun to incorporate additional languages onto our labels, including the names of artists as they appear in their languages and the self-names of Pueblo communities. Beyond expanding their collections, museums like ours are thinking about the many ways we can be culturally affirming and not just inclusive. Okay, now I'm just going to breeze through a few of my favorite moments. Some of the exhibition's grace notes. Distributed across 3 galleries of generations are 4 triptychs. What can this multiplicity achieve for each of these artists? It's a format you fittingly first encounter in Gallery 2 with Max Beckmann's Carnival, a controversial acquisition made in 1946, 3 years after it was painted. And you see here something I found in the course of my research, a study for the painting that was recently donated to the MFA Boston from the family of a private collector who had received it as a gift from the artist. Hold on. In the next gallery, you encounter another triptych by Nigerian-American artist Toyin Oji Odutola. We re-encounter, to cite the theme of the gallery, her brother, porked in an array of poses, none of which render him particularly available to us as viewers. Odutola excels at world building, creating autonomous spaces for the figures she depicts. Their elaborately braided skin with its textural and tonal modulations is highly academic in its technique, but it serves as a retort to the historical absence or flatness of Black subjects in visual media, the gross failure of reproductive technologies like cinema and photography to calibrate for them. And here you see Ana Mendieta's 1977 MFA thesis triptych. In her accompanying artist statement, she writes about herself as a medium for many genealogies. She writes, "In my work, I am in a sense reliving my heritage. My sources are memories, images, experiences, and beliefs that have left their mark in me. Through my work, I make sense and find meaning in them by reliving them." And finally, and this was not something that I realized was happening until after we installed the show, but in the final gallery, you encounter this triptych by Joan Mitchell on loan. It dates to about 15 years after the Mitchell in the collection here. And when asked by the art historian Linda Nochlin whether her use of polyptych, multi-panel formats was meant to evoke devotional painting, Mitchell replied, she's famously acerbic, "That's not my style, no." She went on to explain how much she enjoys dealing with the vertical breaks between each of the supports, working on each canvas separately and never, and she stressed this, never going over the edge from one to the next. Here's another moment in the exhibition that stands out for me. And you're looking at Charles White's 1970 print Wanted Poster Series number 4. From where you would stand to look at it, if you turn, you're looking all the way across to Sam Gilliam's Red April from the very same year. White's is a lithograph made to evoke 19th century wanted posters for individuals who escaped enslavement. It looks like it's on crumbled paper or batik fabric. And the Gilliam is an elegy to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., made by soaking and staining a canvas with acrylic paint. Both rely upon the logic of the fold to reconstitute their supports, to create new abstract topographies. As scholar Bridget Cooks has written, Black artists' abstractions express the illogic of our condition. They work within modes of synthesis and communication in our perpetual time of uncertainty. As Black people, we are treated as the most disposable and avant-garde at the same time, all the time. We are an abstraction. This is a happy accident that I could not resist, seeing Stuart Davis's jaunty stockinged leg sort of reappear in the vertical swoops of Pollock's mural in the adjacent gallery. Here's a moment in Gallery 1 where I find myself considering things like the tension between gravitational pull and levitation, the dense and the atmospheric. And these three objects tell stories across media about the atomic age, the Cold War, and space exploration in the 20th century. Toshiko Takaezu's Moon from 1950, June Wayne's At Last 1000 from 1965, and Isamu Noguchi's Joy from 1958. Takaezu creates universes within her stoneware. Wayne laid the groundwork for printmaking's revival as a fine art in the 20th century. She founded the Tamarind Lithography Workshop in 1960, and by 1965, the workshop produced its 1000th print, hence the title, At Last 1000. In the series, she depicts an atomic explosion in interstellar space. A Japanese American who volunteered for internment during World War II, Noguchi continually looked to the skies in works that grappled with atomic fallout and the Earth's potential self-destruction. In 1947, he designed a sand model for an earthwork entitled Sculpture to be Seen from Mars. It's a face with a nose a mile high. Here you have Joy, which belongs to a series of bent aluminum sculpture that he exhibited in a show called Weightlessness in May 1961, the same month that Alan Shepard became the first American in space. And I just want to conclude with this work. A young girl cants forward with arms encircling her head and stacked hands pressed against a shop window. We wonder when her intensity of focus will flag, if her balletic posture will relax, whether at her grandmother's urging, she will slide her palms down the glass and trudge on. But for now, in the camera eye of Gordon Parks, this Black child faces off with mannequins suspended in allegorically mute insouciance. In the gallery, we have installed this photo by Parks, alongside two magnificent portraits by Grant Wood and Simone Lee's contemporary face jug. These were originally vessels with ties to European and African forms made by enslaved people in the South. These are American vernaculars. The American artist Barbara Chase Rabu recently challenged the assertion that she was detached from the civil rights movement as a Black expatriate living in Europe in the 1960s. On the contrary, she remarked, the coverage of the movement was much less in the American media than in Europe. Early in his career, Parks positioned his photographic practice along the axis of ethical neutrality. But by 1974, he articulated a different expectation. I was born to a Black childhood of confusion and poverty. Time has taught me that it is not enough to look, condemn, or praise, or be just an observer. I must attempt to transcend the limitations of my own experience by sharing as deeply as possible the problems of the people I photograph. So what does it mean for academic museums to conceive of their missions in this way? How can we transcend the cumulative limitations of our personal and institutional histories? Returning to Christopher Bedford's chapter metaphor, borrowed at the start of my talk, these are among the many questions we must ask each day as we turn the page at the museum. Thank you.
A few minutes for questions, if anybody in the audience would like to ask anything.
But we can also chat afterwards. That's fine too.
So can you talk a little bit about how you see those two images, the parks and the very Iowa image right? How do you see those two in conversation?
And
Yeah.
the question, I'll just repeat it so
yes.
people on Zoom can hear, is how do the Gordon Parks and the Grant Wood portrait interact?
Well, so first, I didn't make the point, but should have, that the Parks is a color photograph, and one that was in that moment in the 1950s, it was for a photo essay. It's a work of photojournalism. Color photography was not taken seriously as an art form. So I was happy that actually, when I saw the wood in person, there is such a wonderful set of color harmonies with the parks. But for me, it really was a moment where I was able to show these two children, one of whom I think is facing out in a very revealing way, and one of whom in this particular photograph by Parks, we do not see, though there are others that he takes from different angles as Andrea Tanner and her grandmother are walking down the street where we do see her face. But I think in this case, the complete reversal of her figure, really, to me, they became pendants that sort of showed you the experience of childhood in America, in this case, for a young Black child. And, you know, as Lauren has made the point many times, in the case of the wood, a young Jewish boy in Iowa who is sort of putting on his most all-American attire with his sweater and the football under his arm. So I think the classicism of the wood too, again, it's an incredibly beautiful, technically beautiful painting, was really well balanced by, I think, the carefulness of the composition, the angle that Parks manages to get relative to the figures. So, so they were perfect. And the scale is the scale of the photograph that I think points to the ways that, you know, it would not have been, it would have appeared in Life magazine as you know, an eighth of a column image. So we have the foundation here sort of recognizing that these images were not given their due, and now able to create these wonderful foundation prints at a scale that makes them sort of the equal of an easel painting, for example. Sure.
Okay, well, thank you for your question. And that is unfortunately all the time we have for the Q&A. Thank you for joining us here at the museum and on Zoom. And for those of you here in person, if you'd like to chat with Diana afterwards, please feel free to come up and say hello and ask her anything else you have on your mind. Thank you.